the time we have left, full circle back to the initial question about the arc of your career. Having worked as a security researcher from an academic perspective and now approaching it at Corelight at a startup company, is there anything you would offer about what academics should know about enterprise security that they may not be aware of that you see at Corelight, that things that you wish academics would look at more, or uh, things that, well, things that are a waste of time that they should look at less? You don't have to answer that part, but just the
Yeah.
perspective difference.
Yeah. There's some things. I think one that coming from the ivory tower to industry was unhappily eye-opening for me, is the remarkable state of many modern enterprises, not all, poor state. And so, I gave a talk at RSA last year about, hey, for these sites where we're able to look at the data, who still has SMB V1? And it was like 7 out of 10, and who still has RC4? And it was like 9 out of 10. And they've got SMB V3, they encrypted, and so they got a ton of V2, and blah, and it's just a mess. It is a total mess. And yet these companies matter, and we care about their security. So the problem of securing them is very challenging in a lot of ways. And it directly allies with another thing I'm going to say now, which is what is somehow needed is architecture. It's like, why the hell are all these services talking to everybody who will come knocking? And why do you have things structured so that you fish one person, you party? And some of it has been tackled, like there's zero trust, and there's lots of reasons why it's expensive and hard. So I think that's a great topic. I think it's really challenging. And I think it's one that you just don't think of in academia, because you think, could that be hard? And it's mundane. You're solving mundane problems like, hey, no SMBV1. First the intellectual value in that. But I do think I think the conferences underappreciate the impact you can have, and in fact, the sort of rigorous either data analysis or thinking, or both, hopefully both, you can bring to these problems. It's hard to get the data. I think that was the other one. I think I know from my perspective as an academic, I thought, the big data game is lost. It's like you've got to go to Google or Meta or Flying55 or whatever, or else you can't play. And there is this ground, the enormous ground. These enterprises, they deploy our sensors on-prem. That's where they go. And we have hundreds of customers, and many of them heard. So there is an entire world out there that it's not just cloud, for management. That is under appreciated. It's tough world. Anyway, that's
Excellent.
my little.
Well, that appears to be the time we have. So I think all that's left to do is thank you very much.
Thank you. Oh, I hadn't gotten a good professor to plant off.
I miss it, don't you? With one last thing, which is a problem, and then set your last one.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you.
All right. Well, thank you all for staying. This is indeed the final event of the of the first NINES pod, and this panel is entitled "The Future of Network Systems Research." It's my great pleasure to introduce the panelists: Fabian Bustamante from Northwestern University, my old-time colleague Srini Seshan from CMU, Aurora Panda, Alan Liu, and our Arudith Srini Raman from New York University. And what we have today is an agenda that's composed of 3 different topics because collectively we couldn't really decide which of the 3 we wanted to sort of truly focus on, and we thought that they were all useful, especially for students. And the idea here is that none of us have anything canned that we're going to begin with. So I think we'll just jump right in. And I want to just offer a prompt that we'll quickly just go through the panel and address. And maybe once I read the prompt, everybody in the audience might guess what the majority response is going to be, but I think it's worth throwing out anyway. And the prompt is, what is the one change you believe will most strongly shape network systems research in the next 5 years? So let's just start at the end with Fabian.
It's no, yeah. So just to clarify, is that what you were thinking? No, I'm not sure, but of course, I mean, this is predicting the future and we suck at it. But if I say one thing that is close to what Dave's been pointing out before, the internet is moving away from an engineer ad hoc type of system to something that is very much top down from the large organizations that we are not going to be able to get rid of. And so that changes what we can observe actually, the degree of capacity the network has, how we train with students, and what a role that researchers is.
Sure. So networking research to me has always been like plumbing. We have applications and we have technology. We sit in between trying to connect these together. And if you look at a lot of the fads or trends or whatever you want to call them in networking, they've often been a result of some major change in one of these either application demands, technologies that are being introduced, or sometimes new algorithms that help us solve age-old problems that sit in the middle. Things like when wireless was first introduced, we had a bunch of papers. When peer-to-peer applications showed up, we had a bunch of work on things like distributed hash tables and everything else. So you can often think about it. So you can go to these 3 areas and think about, oh, what's going to change in the coming years? You can say, oh, underlying technology. We saw a bunch of satellite networks. We've seen a lot of stuff in the recent past on optical in the data center. We've seen, other types of link layer technologies, maybe quantum, something else. At the application side, ML is the big elephant in the room, right? We have a huge number of how do we support large data center type applications? But there are other applications. I'm personally excited by things like, AR, VR type applications and streaming media related to that. But these are the areas to look at. In the middle, in terms of new algorithms and techniques, we have ML techniques coming in, we have formal methods. These are the things that are really going to change the way we look at age-old problems.
Sure. Well, I guess I don't have too much more to add beyond what Srini said. I think applications have always sort of guided the way, and they've changed over the years, and they'll continue changing. I mean, since I was a graduate student, there's been many new waves of applications and link layer technologies, so I don't see that changing anytime soon. The fact that there will be that kind of change. So yeah, I know that wasn't particularly insightful, but I think applications have always sort of been part of what has guided our work.
So just like, trying to say, AI, but not directly. Just like I personally feel like, there's some terms of network accountability or accountability of system. I feel like, because of the applications demands, for example, AI and others, that, we should kind of revisit the way that we, collect the data, and then not only just about collect data to do the, current prediction about performance, latency and stuff. It's also about the history about how and why this happens, about, reasoning of certain events that happens. And we kind of sit, thinking about, what kind of system and data infrastructure that could, really help us that, provide structure and structured data to enable our up layer applications. I feel like could, enable a lot of new research around, enable better accountability and collect more data, and then reasoning about why it happens, when, happens, and that could, of course, spawns more applications out layer.
My somewhat evasive answer is I hope none of what we talk about is what defines networking for the next 5 years. I hope it is something that gives people joy, because they're like, I got into networking. I'm not a networking person. I'm a systems person. I got into networking because of a cool graph problem that my advisor pointed out. I like graph problems. It was fun to solve. These seem application-driven things. I don't know if they're necessarily fun to solve. They're too much driven by what companies want. My non-evasive answer is I think we need to get better at defining talking about networks. I think there's a lot of intrinsic knowledge that networking people have. And as someone, for example, who doesn't work on congestion control, I've never understood what it is people are talking about. I've sat through many talks where people claim they're proving congestion control. As far as I know, what they're proving is meaningless because every congestion controller violates that. Maybe we need to get better at talking about it. But again, you should do something that makes you feel like you're having fun. Don't worry about all of this crap.
I really like the opinions that have been offered so far, but maybe I'll weigh in with something that is, I think, significantly different. And this really, in a sense, dovetails with Dave Clark's talk earlier and a couple of comments that Vern made, which is that I think that the most significant change that we will encounter that will dictate network research in the next 5 years is where the money's coming from. We have lived as a community for the last 20 or 30 years with a very comfortable model for funding research, which is that we make proposals to the National Science Foundation or potentially to a couple of other entities, and we collect our funding that we use to pay grad students and ourselves and our projects. And I think what happened last year with Doge and other activities is that we've all had a very significant jolt in terms of how we can potentially keep our research going. And I think that in the next 5 years, if we all work hard, we can bring other funding models into focus, which will likely include industry partners, will likely include legacy alumni from our universities who are at a point in their career where they can be convinced to help to fund research. And I think as these new sources of funding come into focus, we will have a different attitude and perspective about how we conduct our research. And maybe this is something we'll revisit in the last topic, which is the sort of the future of networking research in academia. So that's my perspective. Where's the money coming? It's going to be different than it was before, I believe. All right, so thanks to everybody, and let's move on to our first major topic, which really is about why we're here today with this NINeS conference. And what I would really love is for the people who have been intrinsically involved in this process. So Aurorjit and Fabian and Hari, I know you've got to go. Would you like to weigh in quickly before you? I'm leaving later, but no, I'll just. Okay, great. So Aurorjit, maybe you can start. Why are we here with this conference? What's the future of networking conferences? Is it too darn hard to publish, or is it just different now? Why are we here, and where are we headed? So please.
Okay, so that's a very big set of questions. Let me lay out a thesis and then I'll keep it very short. So I think the fundamental issue with networking conferences today is we're trying to build a conference that meets 3 or 4 different requirements that are at odds. Requirement 1, we want a venue where we can talk to people and we can hear interesting talks. Number 2, we want a venue where we believe all of our students should publish many, many papers. 3, we want all of our students to be able to present the papers. And 4, we somehow want some weird thing about impact and getting industry to have this. I believe these are at odds. Uh, so when you have a conference with tracks, which by the way is not a weird thing, NSDI had 3 tracks this year. It's really hard for people to attend one of the tracks. I think most people end up outside and attending 0 of the tracks. Maybe you're all better than me, but this I will admit this is what happens when I go. So we just need to figure out what to do. And I think when we started NINES, at least for me, some of it was okay. I have worked very closely with Scott for since 2011, and I think he's my closest collaborator at this point. Scott and I had this view that we would really like to hear fun talks, and part of setting up NINES was to get fun talks. I actually really enjoyed your talk, Dave, and I'm very happy that you gave it, and same with Bruce, and that was the goal. And that's why we wanted to decouple publication and presentations. But I think maybe we need to meet all of these requirements, but we need 4 different conferences. I'll let Fabian's been involved too, and he knows a bunch of the old stories.
So my involvement was like accidental, I guess. So everybody met stop fees and CCR, and I was shocked, I guess, the nice way of putting it, that nobody said anything about. I was like, here's Shankar, that's me a noisy on paper, by the way, saying like, hey, there's something wrong with SICOM because we're not publishing the right paper, we just publishing these 1% increments on industry systems. What the hell is going on? So my comment in the Slack, that's one value, I guess, was like, why are you guys not talking about this? And so that started the whole discussion. I think I've been as frustrated with SICOM as everybody else. I had my papers in, but I think it was my 4th, 5th year, I think, into my career. And I started up against Dave Clark in 2008 SICOM, telling him that he didn't know what he was talking about when he was talking about that, when he was saying that publishing in SICOM was easy. And it was like, yeah, well, they can write something overnight and publish it in SICOM the next day. I'm just talking about your insight. So, so that for the rest of mortals, it's nearly impossible. And there's something to it that it's not just a community language. It's just the way in which we haven't come into criticize other people's work, what expectations, and the disconnect between how we do the work and how we judge other people doing the work. The feedback that we provide to people, all of that is completely, I'm sorry to say it, but it's at scale, so not individually, but at scale, it's broken. And it's perhaps broken because of the fact that we're trying to serve too many goals. So NINES, I think, the way I think of it is really like an experimental ground where I don't know how long it's going to leave, but I think it's going to be like, I hope it's going to be like, I don't know, P2P or active networks, things like that, where we don't change the internet as a whole, but we migrate ideas to that space into the conference that we actually survive.
I think so. I got an email from Scott, which I remember this conversation. He said, we had a phone call in June 22, and I believe I know the date because I was going to a meeting and we were complaining about some conference. And I remember you saying, we should start a new conference, something like new ideas in networking. That notion got lost. We had plenty on our plates. And Scott then, more recently, and now got a bunch of people together to revive it. I was frustrated at the time, and I covered this and I spoke at SIGCOM, I think, during the COVID thing. I think that the bar for accepting papers at NSDI and SIGCOM, NSDI, and many of the top conferences is incredibly high from the standpoint of evaluation. And from the standpoint of, is X deployable or Y deployable, or why will someone be incentivized to do it? And the truth is that, and I think Scott lays this out in this document that he wrote, PCs have no idea. People have no idea at the time, certainly at the time it's being accepted. And the impact's only known 5 or 8 or 10 years from now. And we saw some examples today of things where Mohammed mentioned that 2014, they did some packet spraying. There was absolutely no use case, but it was interesting. They built something and it's useful now. So I do think that I hope one of the lessons that goes back to the main conferences in the field are to think about evaluating ideas differently from simply, is this really going to work? Um, and I think you should also go and people should check out Scott's talk about QoS and like what worked, what didn't work. And there were plenty of papers published on QoS. That's still very good academic research. But I remember at the time PCs arguing about X or Y being deployed because the IETF wouldn't take it or not take it. And um, right now, the bar is very high because you see these industry papers with incredible amounts of data that no academic researcher could compete with. So I think it's good to try new ideas out.
Please, can you just give one rejoinder to the sorry. So both Fabian and Hari mentioned this notion of ideas should go back to the main conference. I'm by the way, I'm completely fine with ideas going back to the main conference. Speaking as someone who's put an incredible amount of time into organizing this, my personal plan is to keep this around. And if you go to the website, we actually say this. We want this to be another conference, and part of the reason is look, some of my closest friends, or at least they were friends of mine until now. Maybe they'll stop being friends after it goes out. Were really like they called me and were really annoyed about some of the things we were saying because they said, "Look, you can't possibly say." So if you go to the NINES webpage, we say acceptance does not imply you get to present. A close friend of mine who is at a major university told me this is an idiotic notion. If students are not presenting, they don't get practice. When we said, oh, other people should, so maybe there is space for a conference that does things that are idiotic and that allows for these wider set of talks. And so I'm fine with the existence of this. Like I personally love sitcom. I want it to continue existing. I think it's okay for us to take a different tack for this one. Sorry, shoot me.
Sure. I mean, I think one thing we should remember, it's not like sitcom or NSDI PC is sitting there and say, oh, let's take some really boring papers and not the ones we really want. I mean, they're trying their best at, having chaired several of these conferences. Even the PC chairs try to set this attitude of, look, let's take chances. Let's, not necessarily look for those perfect papers. I think this tends to fall flat once you get around the 10 to 5%, acceptance rates. And we keep kind of oscillating to that over time historically. When I first started after grad school, all the conferences were around 6 to 7%. It was horrible. And I thought as a young researcher, it was a painful process. Because the attitude suddenly becomes the PC, I need to reject 1 out of every, 9 out of 10 papers or even more. So when you get into that mindset, it's very easy to pick apart anything, find the flaws, and what ends up happening is these are, I hear the complaints going around. They're not new complaints often. I had them as a junior researcher. We had them in the 2000s. We've had them in the 2010s, and periodically. So this is Jefferson saying a little revolution every now and then is a good thing. We've generated things like we had position papers at sitcom for a while. No one remembers those except for people with maybe much gray hair as me. Then we were like, oh, those petered out because we would just reject all of them after a couple of years. We had some great Dave Clark papers in that, but then after that it was the end. Then we were like, oh, that didn't work. Let's try hotnets, right? And now that worked for a while, and now people say, oh, it's okay, but it's changed since probably the first few days. Then we're like, oh yeah, the system C type papers, those end up being shot. Let's create an SDI. So we go through this and these things get into a more mature place, and then we complain about them again, right? So I think this has been a fun experience. I enjoy reading the papers. I think the challenge we have to see is there's a longer term solution, or maybe the longer term solution is in 4 years, younger people in the room say, this is a horrible thing. It doesn't work. They make sense. Yeah. Instead of that might be the end.
Yeah, I don't know. I guess I could add something as a PC member. I think a lot of cases when somebody is willing to sort of stick their neck out for a paper, people usually do respond well. Like there's many papers that have gone bad for that I've had reasonable success in convincing people to accept despite their flaws. Now, is it painful sometimes? Yeah, I agree. It would probably be better if culturally we were more open to sort of flawed papers. But sometimes the PC chairs do set the tone, and I've seen a big difference between PC chairs who set the tone very constructively and PC chairs who be more conservative.
I have to say this. PCs are like communists. Everybody loves their communist person, but everybody hates communists. The individual
I
PC
don't know
members are
the
great.
best person here.
No, there's something about the community. Every PC member is individually great. But somehow we get together in that room and it's this 8% accept rate or 12%, whatever the hell it is. It just becomes psychologically damaging to everybody.
But maybe that's the natural endpoint of things, which is why I guess evolution is good.
Yeah, I don't have much to add, but I just have like several quick key takeaway, right? So we really love the in-person experience here today. I just from attendee and also, kind of committee members. One thing, right? So we should run our conference student focused, faculty heavily involved, including senior folks, in somehow, and then moving away. I mean, I'm not moving away, but really thinking about, do we really supposed to select the best paper? The best is really subjective, papers in networking, or we are selecting the interesting paper that student put efforts and move the needle even by a little bit, and lower down the kind of standards. Say, hey, we have to have massive data, massive scale. I think that was kind of my takeaway. I'm happy to chat about this.
All right. Thanks to the panel and to Hari for joining on this very important topic. I just have two quick points that I want to make. I followed the conversation about that led to the creation of NINES for it's been a couple of years now at least, and there are lots of conversations that folks in other communities. So my primary community is Internet Measurement Conference, and Fabian and I and Walter Willinger and a bunch of other people have been having very similar conversations because the same kinds of experiences are taking place in other communities. The 2 points that I want to make is what for me really distinguishes NINES is not necessarily that it sort of originated with Sanker, this paragon in our community. It's that when I saw the PC, I said, that's a PC that I would want to have review my paper. And the point is small with people who I know to be reliable when it comes to assessing technology. How do I know this? Because I've heard their talks. And it's ultimately for me about that PC. The second point that I want to make is to the young people in the room, and I'm not trying to be pedantic in any way here. You're the future of our community. I've been very fortunate in my career to be able to interact with people like Dave and Vern and others, and to learn from them, to be on PCs with them and watch how they assess papers, and to think about how I want to do exactly the same thing. I hope you get similar chances with similar people as you move through your careers. But when you're watching those people assess papers, pay very close attention to the positive ways in which they think about papers. And if you do that, I have no doubt that the future of our community will be strong. So thanks very much, please.
Two good comments. If I had to just look back at my career and think two biggest changes, my conference experience, one has been PC meetings. Went remote as kind of reaction to world events, and we also realized that travel is hugely painful. But the in-person PC meetings gave me an opportunity as a young researcher to network and chat, and that is something that is currently lost. And also, PCs have grown in scale. Also been a challenging kind of issue. The other is the same issues with travel have been hugely impactful, I think, for the conference attendance as well. So this CONS thing is an interesting kind of aspect of this conference. I think that we may have not as emphasized in our comments. But I see a lot more of the senior researchers able to show up because travel overheads are far less. I think it's effective for the students who nowadays have to deal with things like visa and other issues as well. Travel is just really frustrating. The impact of conferences in general, especially engagement for faculty.
So I have a sort of question about this. So I've noticed that every time I talk to people who are in networking, they say PC meetings, once they went online, have to remain online. And the reason I find this surprising is SSP, which is one of the conferences that I target. For the last like 3 years, I've gone to in-person PC meetings, and every senior person in the PC, like senior people are more likely to show up than junior people. Like Nikolai is almost always there if he's on the PC. France is there. Like people who are the why is sitcom so different? Because I also get frustrated because I have gotten comments from people at sitcom saying, you cannot expect us to review this many papers. The burden is too high. Okay, the SSP burden is identical or higher. What about are networking people more busy than systems people? Did I just like miss a memo about this?
Just like I started in the pandemic. I was just like always, you guys are talking about, how good, in-person meetings are. I have two dreams right now, in-person TPC meeting and the in-person NSF panel, given that how proximity of Maryland to NSF and the pandemic happened, that little once since pandemic. So I think that's really beneficial.
I mean, I couldn't agree more. I think that the places I learned the most about how to judge work, I mean, and how to pick projects even, has been in PC meetings, and that's something that definitely we have lost. And I don't know if we can go back there. That I have no idea, but it's one of the things I have a hard time with, uh, as much as I love NINES. So, okay, things NINES was fantastic at. The discussions on the papers all happened online, and they were super constructive. And we were chatting on Slack for a while for every paper that we discussed. And we corrected each other, and senior people to junior people and junior people to senior people without any concern about who you're talking to. I think the tone was set up by the chair, so like to be constructive in the conversation, and that really carried through. The bots idea has been fantastic. I think I have not had much fun in a conference since I don't know when, a very old IMC perhaps, something like that. Where it's much smaller community. Seaton received 165 papers or something like that this year. How the hell do you scale that? How do we have a Slack channel to discuss every paper? How do we bring all those people, whatever acceptance rate you pick, into one place and have them meet? I don't know how we scale this. That's the biggest problem that I have.
Okay, folks, thanks. Great conversation on this first topic, but we've still got two more that we're going to move quickly. And I'm going to ask Alan to respond to our second topic, which is network research challenges and opportunities in the next 5 years. Feel free to offer challenges and opportunities, Alan, but dive in with your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I kind of like started a little bit when you prompt the first one about the 5 years what kind of change that could result in shaping the network system, right? I still want to kind of like strengthen my opinion that I still feel it will be still be how to getting the data and how to getting data like accountable traces and how to get this data to use for our player applications, because it is moving from like, people are talking about this large language model thing, but it's really how it works today, or, so quickly is really a compound system that many components are interact each other that may getting fairly complex, right? So getting this complex system to be accountable and then getting understanding what's happening become a major challenge, and still be not only the network measurement is still a very important angle, but we potentially need to add and then get and collect a tremendous more data about, internals, etc.
Who'd like to go next? Well, maybe me. Well, people can't figure it out. So I have an idea for I think the challenges are fairly obvious, right? Which is that we need to be sure that we have our funding sources in place so that we can offer an experience for students that enables them to get through programs and generate theses. Now, I think we're going to solve that problem. Where I see a real research opportunity, and this is not a new idea, this is something that's been sort of floating there for many years, which is that we have this strange sort of dividing line from a network stack perspective between really for all practical purposes, sort of, I guess if you include the wireless community, layer 2 and above, right? And no one ever pays attention to layer 1, but I've been very fortunate over the last 6 years because of a project that I've been working on to learn a ton about optical networking. And let me just say that there are so many opportunities to do new work by incorporating what's going on with light signals shining through fiber and how that has an impact on everything else in the protocol stack. For any one of you who is brave enough to try to cross that boundary, number one, let me say that I have found that equipment manufacturers, so Cisco, Ciena, Infinera, go down the line, they are wide open to collaboration. All right. And if any one of you is interested in looking down into layer 1, many research opportunities there.
So I mentioned this idea that the internet is becoming an opaque system. It's the biggest concern that I have. As two things I see in the internet become a critical infrastructure, the first global critical infrastructure, and at the same time, has become increasingly opaque, partially because of managed by all these organizations and all the layers of virtualization that we have built. So now what you have is, as researchers and networking, what we have done is we have been working on a system that it was hard to figure it out, but you can do it through measurements. And what we have now is something that, in the best case, you can infer what you see, from your measurement, but you can actually now get almost never get ground truth on anything. And so one of my fights being regularly with the PC meeting conversation was like, what is the ground truth for whatever the heck it is you measure? And that's almost always out of reach. So I'm coming to a point. So I think as a research community, one of the biggest problems that we have is figuring out how to actually, given all these trends, to build tools that allow us to verify systems with the fact that we have only partial observability. So Google's not going to tell you what they're doing, not going to tell you how they're routing, but the internet as a whole relies on it. So can you verify what they're doing without getting access to their source code, to the data set, without getting inside the building, without working for them? And that goes for Amazon and Microsoft and everybody else. So I think that one of verifiability of the network as an external observer in a system that is partially opaque by design, to me, it seems like a very open research problem, and we have no training for.
So maybe I can add something. I don't know, perhaps it's a little too meta, but one thing I have very much appreciated about networking since being a graduate student, and perhaps some of this is channeling Jennifer Rexford, who said it's a problem domain more than an intellectual discipline in of its own right. And one can view that as either, it doesn't have any foundations of its own, or the way I viewed it is it's one of these fields that is completely opportunistic about borrowing from literally any other area in computer science and beyond, like whether it's game theory, control theory, physical layer, electrical engineering, there's no end to that, programming languages and such. And I think that openness has been very liberating for me personally. And, there's very few bounds, honestly, in my mind about what networking is and isn't. I of course wish conference species could be similarly open about what networking is and isn't. But I think as a field, despite the problems with various conferences and such, we continue to make progress. We continue to change the world in many different ways, not just total addressable market. Um, but yeah, I think the multidisciplinary aspect of networking as a problem domain, I think is deeply interesting to me.
I'm probably mixing this with one of the later things that I think Paul is going to ask, but just reflecting both the words and Panda's comment from earlier. There's a lot of stuff to do in networking, and I think the key thing is just finding something that you're passionate about and working on it, and having that desire to dig deep into it and enjoying it or feeling like you have that intuition about the problem as a result. And I think those are the key things to sort of being successful, either as a grad student or as a faculty member, um, on the project that you select. I'll leave it at that.
I don't have much to add to Srini's, but if someone's looking for a concrete problem, one thing that came up earlier today during the previous panel was Rachi and others said, hey, we're using BSP or batch synchronous parallel, and BSP is really bad and we should go away from it. And I spent a lot of time thinking about this last year because I actually really hate machine learning workloads for a very simple reason. They assume a fully synchronous model. And as a distributed systems person, this is disgusting. How can you assume this shit? But you know what? Those people have a point. BSP makes, or assuming a fully synchronous model makes algorithm design easier. The thing is, they don't worry or care so much about reordering. They don't care so much about, can I communicate? Can I be sure that this thing hasn't failed? Can I know this? And of course, it comes at a cost, right? Now, the interesting thing, I think, is what ML has shown us is people are willing to pay enough money to, because like those networks come at a resource overhead. It means there are other people in this room who probably know this better than I do. There is a massive amount of extra money that is being paid into this. But the reason we're paying it into it is we want the we want the algorithmic simplicity, we want to build it out. I think this indicates that we haven't gotten the abstractions right for how we think about asynchrony, or we need more tools to bridge that gap. And this is, by the way, not a networking thing. Even in verification, often the way you verify asynchronous protocols is by trying to go down to a synchronous equivalent and prove this. I think Neer Shabbat too is somewhere in this department. I had this like famous statement that the reason you always talk about sequential specifications is because that's how humans think. And then the question is, take sequential specification, map it to concurrency or asynchrony or other things. And I think we haven't gotten that right. So maybe there's an interesting problem there. I don't know how to solve it.
All right, we're going to move on to the last topic, and then after that, we'll take a little bit of QA from the audience. The last topic is the future of graduate study, and actually, the title that I had is in computer science, but I'll bring that down to computer networking. And as you'll note, we're all professors on the panel, so I'm looking forward to the scope of opinions here. Just to kick things off, I'll say that I'm very bullish about the future of graduate study and the future of networking research in an academic setting. I think that we have a tremendous amount to contribute. The reason that I'm a professor and I stay a professor is because how energized I am in working with my students, the creativity and work ethic that they exhibit on an ongoing basis is inspiring. And I don't see any I don't have any reason to doubt that quality of student will continue to be there, and that makes me very excited about the future of networking studies. So I'll turn it over to my colleagues here on the panel.
So way back when I started grad school, it was 1990, 91. So I was a Berkeley PhD, and Dave Patterson was the chair at the time. And the one thing I remember from my first year is he gave a talk to the grad students where he put up some graphs and he said, "You guys are doomed." He said last year we had, this many PhDs, and here's the distribution of how many job applications they sent out. So people may not know, most of you weren't born in the 90s, um, but that was a really bad kind of dip in the computer industry. And he was like, oh, look, we had students send out 30, 40, 50 applications, didn't get an interview. And he would draw this line of like faculty jobs and number of PhDs, and these lines crossed 3 years before I was expecting graduate. I was like, oh man, yeah, I was going to say I do. What do I do? Here we are, yeah, 35 years later. um, whatever you take from us, if Dave Patterson can't get the predictions right, I'm not going to be the soothsayer who's going to be able to pull it out of the week. But okay, so there's, everyone's worried about things like funding and other issues. I think we should look at these trends and we should realize that we should read them like paper reviews. We've all probably had paper rejections, and we always. One of the things I try to get my students to do is they look at these reviews and they say, oh my gosh, what a stupid reviewer. This guy or gal could not figure out how insightful my paper was. And of course, I covered that particular issue that they brought up on page 3 on the footnote. Yeah. And you're like, okay, let's take a step back from these reviews. And what we should realize is it's more like the customer is always right. The reviewer is always right. Even if we disagree with the opinions of the reviewers, sometimes we need to internalize and think, how could we have communicated our message better? How could we have overcome and made even this person see the value of my work? The same is true for academia. Yes, we may say, oh my gosh, the current administration, they hate academia, they don't see our value. We need to realize we have done a lousy job as academia in terms of conveying the value of research, both to the government and also to the general populace, right? So we need to take kind of our medicine, just like we often tell our students to take our medicine, right? Read the thing, adapt. This is not the first time that when I switched it from industry to academia in 2000, I was there, I could witness, and I had been a grad student through the DARPA days, and we had a funding model, and it was kind of all, roses and honey. And then 2000 came along, a guy named Tony Tether came and took away all our coins. And we bemoaned as academics of how the funding models had changed. We failed at that time too. We never conveyed to DARPA what our value was, so he took away our toys. Same is true now. We didn't learn our lesson in 2000. We said, let's put all our eggs not in this basket. We'll just move them to a different one basket. We moved them to NSF, and we have failed in learning our lessons once again. We will survive. Things will continue, and realistically, yes, we will have blips in funding. We have to convey not just to one side of Congress, but to both sides of Congress, what our value is. We need to win over the general public in terms of what impact that we have. So we have to think about these things a bit more. Now, in terms of being a grad student, you shouldn't worry about any of this. You should be like, what excites me is work, right? And, that's what you're here for, is to learn and to expand what science we know. And just don't live on that. Now, okay, so that's the positive parts for the most part. Or just one negative, I would say that if you look at the end of the PhD, a lot of us through our careers, we had a mindset of maybe being in academia, and that was pretty easy. The thing that drives academic kind of, this is me as an ex-department head speaking now, the thing that drives hiring is enrollments, right? The article I read this, a while ago was I think it was like 43% of MIT undergrad are CS degree majors.
Something like that, yeah.
I think Harvard and others were in the 30s or 20, the high 20s. I mean, we are the most popular major. Where can we go from here? We can't be like 100%. Department. So that's probably the one thing I would say. The demographics of the situation and our past success has limited our inroads to being able to expand academia. That's probably the one thing where I'd be like, I don't know what to do.
I guess on the topic of what networking problems are interesting and such, I think it's ultimately for the students to decide. Like this, like every research field is grassroots in that sense, and I think there's lots of implicit and explicit signals about what is hot and what is not, and like ultimately, yeah, you need to just be happy about coming into work every day and working on something that keeps you engaged. So I think the fewer notions you have about, what ought to be good research, the more likely you are to actually do good research in the process. Because, there is really no rubric for this stuff. Like weird ideas sometimes turn out to be completely influential down the road, and completely solid ideas turn out to be duds, right? So there's really no rubric to this. So I think this is not to say one shouldn't follow the scientific method and be skeptical and all of that stuff, but at least I suppose in the hypothesis generation phase, it's good to be creative and just like not put restrictions on oneself. Anyway, that's all I had.
Yeah,
All right, fine. Yeah, I don't think I can add anything of value to what these guys have said. I think that comment about picking something that you're gonna wake up on Saturday morning and go to the lab to work on, it's the most important message that any advisor I have ever talked to has said. And that it's not by, you don't pick those topics by looking at what is hot in SICOM and SDI, whatever it is, conference at this moment. How do you figure it out? And the only way I have done it, and I don't know if it's reproducible, is I read a lot and, like randomly. So, and random reading, I think, is the most valuable thing. I'm not particularly intelligent. I don't think I'm well educated, but I have a thin, broad layer of knowledge. And I think that has worked well for me because I've been able to just migrate random ideas from everywhere else. So lateral thinking is the way people refer to that. I think it's basically because I'm not too deep, but the lateral thinking has worked fantastically well. So I don't know. I think that has a lot of value in that. And to your comment about our failure of communication, I think it's, Paul pointed out the same thing, I don't know, say a couple of years back. Like he said pretty much the same thing. Let me rephrase something like, I know these guys, I grew up with these guys, and we are failing at communicating this to these guys. It was like these guys being those in the administration nowadays. It took me back because I'm coming from the same social class, and it's, from Argentina, from the US, I think it's very much the same. That level need the same level of conversation, and we fail at doing that. Somehow, I have no idea when we went into, as I say, the average tower to talk to other people like us and not to anybody else. They don't need translation. We don't explain anything. We know what we're doing. And it's definitely an error of our part. But that can only say that as with my paper reviews, 2 days or a week after receive the paper review or the NSF section, or first it's like, what the hell is wrong with you? So then I had to go for a run, and then when I come back, maybe I can get into that line. Please,
Okay. So I think the original question was future of grad school. So I took I worked for 3 years between undergrad and grad school, and I worked at a job that I really loved. I built experimental operating systems for Microsoft, so I was part of the problems that Brad and other people were describing. Um, I came to grad school in part because I was bored, and George Necula, who is in PL, promised me that it was more fun. And I don't know why people are so worried about the future of grad school. To be honest, what was most fun about grad school was someone took care of my bills, and all I had to do was sit there and do fun things. And you know what? Sometimes I just used to talk to my advisor about West Wing, which is because we would quote it to each other. Um, and yeah, it was fun. And you know what? No matter what happens with AI, no matter what happens with anything else, no matter what happens with the collapse of computer science or not, it will be fun. Like, look, at the end of the day, academia is a bit like the old school, like, we're some sort of cloister of like weird, I don't know, we're sort of stuck in this closed environment, and we talk to each other. And maybe you hate that, and if you do, there's a lot of really good things to do outside. Maybe you'd like that, and you know what? It's fun to just sit around and think about things. And both are okay. It's not a value judgment. The smartest people I know would never go to academia, and that is okay.
And on that note, um, it's been a long day. Thanks to all of you for staying for the last panel. Let's take one or two questions from the audience before we conclude. Anybody have any questions? Please.
So, they claimed in the previous panel that instead of 1 or 1.5 years, or in some of my cases, much longer than that, to publish a paper or a system, CCOM or ACI or NINES or whatever. Now it may become possible to achieve the same level system within a month or overnight. I don't know, depending on how good various tools become. How are we going to adapt to this, if at all? Like, should we adapt to this? Are we going to have to adapt to this?
I think standards will change. Supply and demand will meet, and will basically say, look, people who submit a SETCOM, it's already self-selecting. There's lots of people who I know who don't submit to SETCOM because they don't think the work is good enough or whatever. Correct or wrong, this is just a fact of life. If it becomes so easy, people will think that the bar they must meet for their work is high, and then we'll go down. So that's my view. I don't know. Like, this is a guess.
It seems to be in conflict with what Trini was saying earlier, right? Where if the bar, if we have to increase our standards, we get down to like below 5% of papers that are submitted get accepted, then much more.
So I think the question is, what do you mean by standards, right? So is it ideas or is it effort? Sorry, Dave.
No, I was going to change it. I was going to ask you a question when you're done answering that.
No, I mean, so yeah, I think it's just a question. It's not the 5%, right? It's more that people stop submitting because, hey, or people say, hey, what I produce in a month is not going to be considered enough. I need to do something much more.
I'm not sure I have a creative idea on this. Yeah, I mean, it is kind of this thing of like, what's the expectations of the community? I mean, you might be able to do good work in a month, but if that means there's 10,000 papers and we're only taking 30, yeah, you'll probably put in more time than it says. And so then we're back to where we started. I think the hard kind of value judgment is, should we have actually seen that work at the month level? And should we have figured out some way to accommodate that? That's a deeper question, I think, that I had no idea.
Sorry, I want to add to that conversation, because I think this year's OSDI explicitly said that we want to target 20% accept rate. The consequence of that is OSDI last year had 350 submissions. This year is almost triple. It's like almost 900. I think that reflects if like the company going to say, oh, I'm going to target 10%. You could imagine people play the game. It's like, I'm just submitting like 10 papers. But yeah, just that's.
I was going to ask a controversial question.
Oh yeah.
When our graduate students come out, they go in 3 directions, as near as I can understand. Some of them aspire to academia. The perception I have talking to students who are considering going into academia is that pre-tenure sucks, because you have to raise money. there are those who work for big companies and moving them for that, and there was one who do startups. And I think the students may not know what they want to do, and so we should groom them generally so that they can go on these options. But it is our fault that we have taught them that the hurdle they have to jump is going to multiple conferences that have 5% acceptance rate. And maybe that's just the whole wrong idea, especially if they want to go to a startup, they want to go into industry. I don't know, because I'm at my age, I'm not dealing with new graduate students because they're irresponsible at my time. And so I don't know what industry looks at when industry tries to hire these people when they go in. And I'm wondering whether we're actually stuck in a paradigm that is our own creation. And for academia, if you want to have your sort of standards, you got to have 6 papers and 5 whatever. Okay. But I'm not sure that, I think fewer of our students are aspiring for that because they look at their supervisors who are pre-tenure and they say, they're suffering. I don't want to do that. So we might want to rethink this a little more generally and say, telling the students that they have to submit 6 papers, that's not the fun part. And we're all talking about graduate students to be fun. Maybe somehow we should shift the whole paradigm based on where we think our students want to go, and we should shape the process, how they're evaluated, so that they get the job they want. The conference was a minor attempt to do. Maybe we should blow the whole system up and start.
Boy, can I just respond quickly, Dave? I really like your perspective here, which is, let's take a step back and assess. And let me offer something that maybe no one in this room maybe is aware of or thinking about as a fourth alternative to Dave's lineup of potential job opportunities. And I'm acutely aware of this now in my role as chair of the UW-Madison CS department, which is, you may or may not be aware, but the future of computer science as a discipline, and I'm not overstating this, depends intrinsically, and trust me, I'm not overstating this, on something that we call teaching faculty. There are hundreds, and again, I'm not exaggerating, hundreds of teaching faculty openings across the United States. We are dying literally for great teaching faculty who, by the way, we encourage to do research if they want to. We pay them, by the way, just as much as we pay assistant professors when we hire them. So it's not an economic deficit that you put yourself in. And they are equal, they're our peers. They come to our faculty meetings, they make the same, they have the same input on decisions as regular faculty. I honestly encourage you to think about that, you students, as a potential direction, because you don't have to worry about the tenure bar. You have de facto tenure if you're in the department for 3 years as teaching faculty. We can't fire you unless you do something illegal. I'm not seeing what the downside is of being a teaching faculty. And as you've heard from the group here, I mean, what we like is working with students anyway. So it's a fourth opportunity, and you don't have to have 5 papers in 5% accept rate conferences. Guess how many papers you have to have? 0. You just have to have a degree, a PhD. In any case, that's a little bit of an obtuse perspective.
Yes.
Please. What's
So-
the teaching load?
Our teaching load is 1 class per semester.
Teaching.
So also just
Now, the bigger classes, okay? So you don't get to teach 25 people. You might have to teach 200 people or 300 people.
I think there's going back
Did
to
I mention 0 committee responsibilities? So it's not too bad. Sorry.
So just going back to the comment about especially the pathway to industry. I do think there's a role to have closer ties between the PhD programs and departments and industry in the future. But right now we rely purely on just like occasional summer internships. When we talk about, things like students from the military, there's like a very close relationship. Might be things where it's like, oh, we have students come either from industry or going back to industry or effectively signed up with an industry partner as part of their research objectives. And I think that's probably, especially with the funding issues, that might be something that it comes into play to a larger degree.
I'm afraid. I don't want to go. Sorry to all my friends, but I don't want to go to Europe. I don't want the European model of research, and that's my fear with that. That's what we will turn into that. We're shortening the horizon of our research because it's going to be through close involvement with industry that necessarily will touch that. I mean, maybe it's the way to get out of this hole at the moment, but I'm not sure that I like it long term. But to your point, I remember in my early uh, years and was we will send every tenure K with a letter from the pilot explaining how they should look into my code, the code that I have built as part of my tenure package, not just papers. So I think it probably goes the same for students, right? And so that's a little bit along Dave's comment, right? So you don't need to publish whether 5% conferences. Here it is, the code that you have built and distributed, and that's something that maybe is a better case for you.
Last question, please.
So nice, like students will get to see more of the behind the scenes of the conferences. Like I feel like at the PC meeting, like the person more often than not, it's the students' very long time of work being evaluated on. And I just feel like as a student, I have no idea what happened. And I mean, because NINES is like just starting up and we're talking about what we want from this, how we want to shape it. Like, do you think you could consider like maybe students being part of it or some more ways students can see behind the scenes of what happens at a conference?
Sorry, I'm going to be the mean person. No. Uh, let me rephrase that a little bit. I think some portion of how we come to a decision is bureaucracy. Some portion of how we come to a decision is by talking to each other. So Fabian talked about the fact that we use Slack this year. So I was involved in that discussion with Katrina, who was my co-chair. And here is our worry, and which is currently when you write SECOM reviews or when you write OSDI reviews or SSP reviews or NSDI reviews, every review that you write goes out to a student. Most reviewers, and I'm included in this, we work really hard to make sure that those reviews sound positive or at least constructive. Like, I'm not saying that we won't say your work has these flaws, but we really work hard. Now, the issue with doing that is, for example, maybe I say, I don't understand this paper. Like, I'm giving an example where, let's say Fabian and I are reviewing the same paper. I don't think we did this year. And it's a measurement paper, and I'm not very good at measurement. And I say, I don't understand this thing. Our goal is for me to say honestly, look, I don't understand this. I have no idea what's going on. And for Fabian to come and tell me, hey, let me tell you what is happening. A lot of the best decisions. So Srini said Hotnet sucks. I need to talk to him about why, because because I'm also the steering committee chair for that. So I need to know. But one of the things when I've been on Hotnet species that I've really liked is we get on calls with each other. So a couple of times we've gotten on calls and we've just said, I don't agree with your review. What the fuck were you thinking? And we argue with each other and then we write something. Having students present there, like having people in there whose work we are considering in the room is very uncomfortable. So to an extent, we want honest conversations. And my goal is to make sure that PCs and reviewers have honest conversations with each other. I want to make sure that if I know something and someone else doesn't, or vice versa, we should correct each other's things. Having someone else there makes it into this thing where everyone feels a strong urge to prove that they are correct because they've made some judgment. So I'm sorry, no. There are other venues. There are mock PCs of various types, but NINES is not going to be that venue. I apologize.
But I think that it's a different point, right? So I agree with you that I would like, I think one of the things that I like about NINES was that we had those open discussion, and I have a lot of people smarter than me where I had to tell them like, you are getting this all wrong, and this is the way the paper should be. You're not getting the paper. Do not reject the paper on the basis you misunderstand it. And and you feel comfortable to say that, to have that conversation. At the same time, there is an issue of opacity of the reviewing process that as a student is at least frustrating.
I completely agree with you,
That-
Fabian,
that
but,
part.
but I completely agree with you. But this sort of goes back to my conferences are trying to meet these 4 or 5 goals, all of which are at opposition. So pick your goal. Like for NINES, as I said, our goal is we want, like, we set out a bunch of goals. One of them was we want reviewers to be humble. The humility part, which, by the way, I hate that terminology. We're going to change that someday. The humility part was if I don't know something, I should be willing to admit in an informal way, I don't know it. And it's fine for you to come and tell me you don't know it. And I don't feel that's often the case with Hotcap. Like I've left comments saying, here's something you misunderstood. I've never had people change their review, at least with high probability data. Sorry, Brad.
Just, I think, please correct me if I'm wrong, you probably know it much better than I do, but I guess there was an element in the statement of motivation for NINES that said that the reviewing process needs to focus on discussing the merit paper more than on sort of pontificating to the authors about
100%.
this is what I think of your work. It's not more of a what should be in the program for the community's sake. So that's also an aspect of what you're saying, I think, as well, right?
Yeah.
So I think there's another piece to this, which is if you don't understand something and you're a reviewer for this conference, then maybe the paper needs to have been written somewhat differently so that you would understand it. And that's a more positive way of saying, this is not, I'm not an expert in this field, but I ought to be able to read that paper also, get something out of it.
Okay, so I will admit of the 3 conferences I have been PC chair for to 2 workshops and 1 conference, this was an explicit goal for HotOS. I'm somewhat afraid of making it an explicit goal for NINES. Here's my honest reason for this. So I know very little about wireless. Actually, I nearly failed my prelims, which is the second year exam you have to take at Berkeley, on which Scott insisted I take on networking, because Scott and Jan knew that I didn't know wireless and they insisted on asking me about every variant of the hidden terminal problem. But I don't think I think it is okay, or I think, in fact, like Sylvia has convinced me that it is good for us to accept wireless papers. And I think that while I'm maybe exceptionally bad at it, I think there's a lot of people in the community who don't entirely understand that. And un, and I mean, as Anirudh put it, the community, like part of networking is it's this big tent style thing, and I don't know how to make it so that everyone has. I mean, I don't disagree with you, but that also has its own set of trade-offs, I would say.
My thanks to the esteemed panel for your thoughts and your time. Thanks to the audience.
So unfortunately, I have to leave. So even though I'm not from MIT and I have very little to do with this, I'm supposed to thank you all for coming. I hope you all had a great time, and thanks for coming up to Boston. For people on the live stream, this is basically the end of the live stream. So we've gone slightly over 24 hours, so there's going to be a lot of content for you to watch tomorrow or day after, but goodbye and good luck.
Good night.